Welcome back to the Budding Author Podcast with me, Simon Ward, your host. Today we are talking to Dr. Poppy Gibson on Wellbeing in Education. How you doing, Poppy?
Hi, yeah, really good. Thanks, Simon. Happy to be here. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. We're having a busy time of it, but we're building up to Christmas now. So,
Oh, I know. Gosh, it's almost
getting
here.
on with
Are you
Christmas.
organised? Tree up in
Oh,
your house?
well, my wife's organised. She's the organised one as far as things is concerned with that. I think the colloquial we've got pretty much all the presents, I think, now, so it's all sorted.
Wow, very organised. No,
So
no Christmas Eve stress for you.
no. I've been there before. I've been when I was in my single days. I would have been going out sort of like on the 20th or whatever, getting some stuff. And then
That's never
okay,
fun.
so how can we get that now to the people? Now you've finally got the present. So getting stuff to around to different parts of the country and all that kind of game. The joy of writing. You've got very involved with well-being in education. I think years gone by, people sort of like not even sort of touching on that. It was like, oh, that's the kids. Don't worry about them; they'll be fine, sort of thing. But I mean, that has changed, and people are much more aware now of that kind of problem, and sort of guiding children a little bit better. I think we talked just before we came on air about a non-fiction book that I've published on that same kind of subject. But before we get on to that, tell us how you got involved in writing and working with education of children.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is, Simon, when I was at school myself, so when I was at primary school, I think I was about 10. I think it was year 6, about 10 years old. I remember our teacher asked us, what would be your dream job when you grow up? And I said, I'd love to be a famous writer. Now, I'm not famous yet. I guess we should always be hopeful. But I'm definitely writing. So I'm so grateful to have achieved that part of my dream. And I think a lot of it came through my own childhood experience, and I became a primary school teacher and seeing how powerful books can be. I mean, you know this. Books are such a great way to learn, to expand our knowledge, to open up conversations. And so after, as I went through my own teaching career, I started to think, where can I not only share my knowledge in books, but also really encourage the voices of others? So a lot of the books that I've published so far are books for teachers. And the thing I love most, although I love writing my bits of the books, I also love inviting other educators or even trainee teachers or teaching assistants who might think their voice doesn't matter, kind of reminding them your voice 100% matters. Everyone's experience can help someone learn something. And so a lot of the books I've written often have collaborations from other people. And so it's only though, and I hope one thing we'll talk about today is I've also written my first children's book. And I guess the one message I have to give a takeaway that is going to be the thread through this whole podcast episode is don't give up on your dream for your book, whatever that is, because my children's book has been the hardest book to publish. It's been, whereas like with all my other books, I've had publishers like, I really want you to write this book for teachers. This one was a hard one. We'll unpick why. A lot of people have been a bit scared of this book, but officially just published this month. And I think that's the real message I want to sell as we both tell our stories today, Simon, is don't give up on your dream. If you've got an idea for a book that you love, that you're passionate about, keep going with it, keep pushing it, because there's a reason that you're passionate about it. So yeah, that's kind of me.
I think writing is such a joy, really. I think from some of my other guests, we've sort of come up with a point of it's about enjoying the process, not about the money. Sort of earning money from writing is quite a tough gig. But getting that message out there and the message that comes to you and being able to share that, but whether that in fiction or non-fiction. I've written a children's book as well that sort of it connects with a novel I'm writing. I'm writing a novel called The Healer, and
Oh, that sounds good.
the healer gains his ability from catching a leaf, which is a traditional children's book. They encourage children to go out and catch a leaf in autumn, and they get a
Yeah.
treat if they caught a leaf. And the adult version of the
Wow.
book, or the adult theory behind the book, is when adults do that, they sometimes get a special gift. And that's the story behind The Healer, which is going through editing stages at the moment. The catch a leaf story that I refer to is a story I've created. So that doesn't exist
Wow.
yet. That's sort of out at for review with publishers at the moment. Whether
Good
that's sort
luck. Almost there.
well, it's if it comes back popular with the publishers or not, or whether I self-publish, I don't know yet. But it's yet sort of my complex mind has got all the different levels to it. So
It sounds fantastic to me. I can't wait to read it.
the catch and leaf story then grows extra levels and that sort of stuff. And then I've got other ideas as well for going forward for more children's books, but touching into the child's mind is a challenge.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about the book that you've put forward, which is a very sensitive subject. What made you think about writing about death and grief in a way that children would understand that?
So good question. And I think it actually came from when my own dad died. I was an adult. I just turned 22 when he died. But I noticed, even when I went back into the staff rooms, I was a primary school teacher and a very new to my career primary school teacher. He died in the May, and I remember going back into school and all the teachers there, amazing colleagues of mine, even they as adults, as teachers who are so wise, didn't know how to talk to me about it. And I noticed that a lot of people were almost avoiding me in the staff room or keeping conversations very short. No one wanted to say, how did he die or when's the funeral? No one wanted to ask those questions. And I realized, even as teachers, we're not quite sure how to communicate with adults about death and grief. And that's really when the seed was in my mind. We're talking about like over a decade ago now. But even at that time, I remember thinking, there are certainly some subjects that teachers are not always prepared for. On their teacher training, we get shown how to teach maths, how to teach a good English lesson, but we're not always told, how to talk about the tricky subjects in society. Like I know you've written your amazing book about how to deal with addictions. So we don't always prepare teachers to have those conversations. And so, as we know, books are really powerful because they can also not just provide information, but make that space, right? They make a space between the reader. If you're reading a book with a child, you're creating a space for a conversation, a space for reflection. And so although I've kind of had this idea since my dad died, it was only really about a year ago, I thought, do you know what? I need to write this book. I feel like I'm at a place in my career where I've got a good network of people. And so I wrote the book. I wrote it in about a day. It's a children's book, and I was so passionate. I wrote it in a day. The hard bit then.
What age is you targeting?
Well, ta-da! Here's the book. When they died. It's a hard one with age. In normal children's books, quite easy to think of the age. I think this one's a bit difficult because it is about death. You also have to think how the parent and carer feels about open up that conversation. So I've read this with my own children. The youngest is 5, but I appreciate for some people that might seem too young for their child. I've used it most successfully with my 10 and my 13-year-old. We've actually really reflected on the big questions. But even my adult friends, so my friend who sadly just lost her dad, I was telling her about our book because actually as adults, we don't always have time to think what we think about death. So this book is, it's got like children's questions. For example, when they died, where did their soul go? So it opens up that question for you to then think, do I believe in souls? What are souls? What does happen when we die? And then it gives it a kind of an answer. And then you can think, do I agree with that answer? So the book's not, in this case, it's not about teaching people right and wrong, but it's about encouraging you to reflect, to communicate. So age-wise, I'd say it's whatever you're comfortable with. But certainly I've seen it work really well with older children, young people and adults. Yeah, sorry, Simon.
With Christianity, there's the talk of heaven, like, oh, Nanny's gone to heaven and that sort of thing. But Christianity is not such a strong place in people's lives now. So there's a different question there, isn't there? If you can't say, oh, Nanny's gone to heaven, it's like, well, we don't believe in that. So what's the
you need to read the book. But it is a complex one, particularly when you bring religion into it. It becomes more complicated. And for teachers who are teaching in a class where they might have children from all different religions, all different backgrounds, then there is no right and wrong answer. So I think what we wanted to do with the book, and it's illustrated by Alfred Russo, my amazing illustrator, because that was the part of the difficult bit, was finding someone willing to illustrate a children's book about death, because it's a little bit spicy. But Alfred, you can see here, his illustrations are so beautiful, Simon. He was totally on board. Like, this is the first page. When they died, what happened to them? And so we've got this kind of protagonist, almost like a kind of grim reaper figure. So Alfred came up with him. We wanted something that wouldn't be babyish, because we wanted to appeal to adults as well. But I think it's a way to remind us how powerful books can be. And I think when children are so used to accessing, videos online, instant gratification with very quick videos, there's still something so special, isn't there, in making space for a book? It allows you to slow down. So I definitely think this is a great way we support wellbeing and education, is through sharing books like this.
I think because you've got the angle as well with sort of cremation and burial. Is that the subject you cover?
We do, actually. We do. Let me find you the question. I think we talk about people could be, so this one, the question was, when they died, what happens to their body? And again, I'm sure we've all had times in our life where we've said, a pet's died. We said, oh, they've gone to sleep for a long time, or they've gone on holiday. And again, it's doing children a disservice. So the way we answer it in the book, we say, well, their body isn't alive anymore, so it will start to decay. The body may be cremated in a special fire and turned into ashes, or buried carefully in the ground. So it's opening up that there's different possibilities. It might open up the chance for a child to ask what happened when their grandparent died. Because again, these can be a bit difficult for a parent or carer or teacher who doesn't know how to answer them. The book kind of takes the pressure, I think, off the adult, and you can just unpick it together through the book. Although it is interesting, after reading this with my children, sometimes they didn't ask the questions on the day we read it, but like in the days following, we were on the school run. My daughter's our dog died, and we had her cremated, and then again, we all believe different things in my family, and my son had said, her soul went into the clouds. I don't believe that, but he believes that, and he'd said that to my daughter. Our dog's soul went into the clouds. And then she thought about that, and then the next day she said, how did her soul get into the clouds? Did she use a ladder? And I just thought, that's so cute. Like, you're trying to make sense of such a big thing. But the important thing was that we were talking about it and unpicking it. And I was saying, what do you think? And how we can't be sure. But it just made space. And I think having these awkward conversations with children are preparing them for adulthood. Because certainly I was 22 and I did not feel supported when my dad died. And I just want us to do a bit better for children, because they are going to lose people, aren't they, in their life? And so we want them to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, it's difficult. I think, as you say, the initial reading of the book is one thing. It's the questions that come after. And often you don't have an answer to that question.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example. I shall depersonalize this. A grandparent had a burial, and every time they went back to the burial site, they just see them in the coffin, in their head, in the coffin, underground on their own, and they struggle with that.
Wow.
I don't know what the answer to that conundrum is, really.
I would say the best thing, because that sounds quite a haunting image.
Yeah.
The best thing is that they're talking about it. And I think the problem is when people die, we often see the funeral, the cremation, the burial, the funeral, sometimes a wake. That's then we draw a line.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll think about them on special anniversaries and Christmas.
Yeah.
But often in our society, I think we don't really talk about that again. Like we've buried them.
It's difficult to move on from that.
Yeah, people want to move on, don't they?
So I think with a cremation, we imagine that sort of it's all gone, and it flows into your memories, or the cloud, as you say. When there's a body just placed in the ground,
yeah,
it's a different thing. Now, research for one of my books, I understand the decomposition process and how long that process takes.
Ooh.
So
this sounds like this was a really pleasant bit of research for you, Simon.
I did wonder whether I'd have a call from the police when I was sort of, how long does it take a body to decompose? And it is quite gruesome, but it was an important part of research for the book. It was Time to Click, by the way.
Oh, can't wait to read it.
Just the very, without giving away too much, the very start of the book, our lead character has been dumped in a big ditch, like a double width grave plot.
Oh boy!
Left for dead, and is hooded, so he can't see. But then he comes into contact with another body that's in there that's decomposing.
This is the opener.
Yeah, that's the opener. Yeah.
Oh, okay. This book is exactly my cup of tea. But you know, a lot of people will probably be scared from hearing that right now, or some people would love it.
I think when he tries to use the body as leverage to try and get out of the ditch, and his foot goes straight through him, and maggots are on his leg.
Wow. But does he get out? I need to read it.
He does get out, but that is not the most horrific part of the story. I'm saying no more.
Is this one published or not yet?
Yeah, this is published. Time to Click. It's
okay. I'm treating myself for Christmas. I need that book. Simon, that's a really interesting point you make about decomposition, because I challenge listeners of your podcast today to know this. Do you know how your children would want to be buried or cremated? And my bet is that most listeners have not asked their children that question. But I'll tell you something that came up after reading our book to my 13-year-old son, so my teenage son. Again, we read the book, and then it was the next day he said to me, he was like, I was thinking about what I'd want to happen to my body. And he said, I'd like to be buried in one of those tree pods. Have you seen them, Simon, where they put the human body in the fetal position in a massive pod and they grow a tree? Weirdly, so he told me this, my 13-year-old, and I went, that is my wish, to be buried in a tree pod. And we've never had that conversation. And so we were like, that's so weird. And then I found out there's one near here. So I'm going to see if he and I can go visit. But I honestly bet a lot of people have not had that conversation with their teenagers or even their adult kids. And I think it's so important. Like, we forget.
Or even their parents.
We could die at any point. Or with their parents, yeah. And we don't want to think about it because it's a bit morbid. But anything could happen to any of us at any time, right? And wouldn't it be nice to know how although, you know, we might think they may or may not even know what happens after they die, but just to honor their wishes. So I just thought that was really amazing that my son started that conversation with me, like that he's been able to think about, one day I will die, here's what I would like to happen. Again, this may seem a bit too much for some people, but it's life, right?
How I understand covering that subject, and I think it's an important subject to cover, but we know how children dwell on things. How do you lift them back out of that so that kind of thought process doesn't stay with them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's why as well we say, like, the book depends on you and your child, because there are certainly some children who might be too sensitive that would, as you say, internalize it, dwell upon it. And I think it's about framing death as a part of like having a life well lived. So sometimes we forget, don't we, that I believe we will only be in this human body one time. I do think our energy never dies, and I do think our energy comes back in other ways, but we'll only be this human person one time. And so I always say to my children, like, how beautiful every day is. We talk about gratitude, like being happy, putting things in perspective. And so really making the most out of life. We never moan about small things. We try. And when we do, then we try and put it in perspective. Like, it doesn't matter. And so I think we try and focus on life is beautiful, noticing those micro joys around us, like living our best lives that we can. So that we see death as just, sadly, it is a natural part that will come to us all. But we look a lot, we have a lot of pets in our family, Simon. So when they die, we don't just like brush it under the carpet. We talk about it. We have a little ritual. We pick flowers. And we try and find the beauty in that. And we'll all, for example, recently one of our chickens died. And what we did, we all went round and we told like a funny memory of them. When our dog died, we had a special candle made up with her picture on and her name, and we light it and we talk about her. So we also think how death doesn't have to be a scary thing. Sadly, it will happen unless they've learnt to freeze us all or reincarnate us or whatever. But at the moment, they don't have that for us, normal people. So just reminding them that actually, if you live the best life you can, you'll still live on even when you die, through the memories of lovely things that you do. But it is big. It's a big conversation, right?
It's the old classic line, death and taxes. I think when somebody of senior years passes, when both my mother and father passed away, my grief process was not very deep, really, because they were both over. Well, my dad was 89, my mum was 85, and they both had a very long life, a very good life. So it wasn't hard. It wasn't hard in that respect. But I lost a couple of my brothers before they were 60. And and that's a whole different game. But then we have sort of like children that pass, and that's a whole different world to acknowledge and absorb.
Yes, definitely.
That's a life well lived is a glorious thing, and the ability to have that is taken from some. So I think, how do we make sense of it for children when somebody of a similar age to them passes?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, you can't make sense of it, right? It's totally unfair. It's awful. It doesn't make sense. And I think the main thing there is just ensuring there's a safe space for children to ask questions or just to be heard when they say how they feel. So last year, sadly, there was a school where one of the children was terminally ill, and they invited me to do a CPD for staff. And I spoke to the staff around, some of the ways you can support the children in your class, the ways you can support yourself as well, because as an adult, you've got that secondary trauma of supporting the children in your class. But really, there is no way of making sense of that in my mind. And it's really just about making that safe space. I think if children feel that their classroom is a safe space. Even now I teach adult learners at university, but it's still about having that safe space where they can talk about an issue that's going on at home, or they can moan about their partner or whatever it is, or money worries, you know, because it's when we lock these things inside and we feel that we can't talk about them, that's when we feel like we're isolated. But sometimes just talking about things can make us feel better. It can help us reflect how to move forward. And I think it's the same with children and grief, because
But
it's so big.
is that the place for schools to do that? I saw something on the news the other day where they were taking a washing machine into the school because children weren't getting their clothes washed. So should it be the schools that are dealing with that, or is that something that should be dealt with at home?
It's really difficult, isn't it? Yeah, I've seen that, you know, going on in the news recently around poverty, isn't it? And parents and carers can't afford to wash clothes. Schools are doing it. Schools are giving free secondhand uniform. I guess schools shouldn't need to be doing it, but at the end of the day, they are well placed to help where these people aren't getting help, maybe from the government, they're not getting the funding they need. Schools are well placed, and schools should be recognised as such a valuable part of the community to support people. Schools need more money. That's the big problem as well. But no, in an ideal world, teachers were made to teach, right? But you know, schools can help where they can. And I think, although, again, teachers aren't mental health practitioners, they shouldn't have to coach children through grief. But ultimately, they say never work with children or animals, right? But when you're working with children, when you're working with humans, we can't always just detach. We can't think that as soon as children come through our classroom that they switch off their home life and they just focus on the work, do they? If you think when something awful's happened at home, wherever you go that day, you're probably thinking about it. It's the same for children. If their grandparents died and they come to school, they can't just switch off. It is going to be in their brain. So it's about, you know, teachers making sure that if children do want to talk, that relationship is strong enough that it feels safe to do so. But yeah, schools and funding is that's for another day. That's too big for this podcast.
Well, as we sort of mentioned before we came on air, the non-fiction book I've written about gambling.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Gambling Now the Score is, covers the subject of gambling, rather than simply saying to children don't gamble. It sort of gives both sides of the gambling world and the pros and cons of both sides. Perhaps learning who's playing the game, and you think you're playing the game, but it's actually the game is being played by the promoter. And
I love it. I love that you've made it for children. How do you envisage your book would be used in a school setting?
I think it'd either be parents reading it to help them educate their own children, or for secondary school children to have a read through it. It is quite light-hearted, easy to read, so there's a few of my personal stories in there to sort of get a smile, sort of thing. But maybe equally it could be a book used in school, so for reading for the class, to sort of talk about experiences and similar to the processing grief, their experience of people gambling, such as, oh, well, my mom, she always goes and gets the lottery tickets and that sort of thing. And I cover the lottery in there, which in some terms I think it's a tax on the poor, really. It's because the odds available are more like teasing than gambling. And then you've got things like the promotions on the radio where George Michael Careless Whisper comes on the radio, where text to win and that sort of stuff. The odds and the return on that kind of gamble is ridiculous, and people don't see it as gambling. And that's
I hadn't thought of those radio shows as gambling, actually, but you're right, they're so easy because they even just say text this number, and then like text costs £5 or whatever. But if you think so many young people have a smartphone now, that is such an easy gateway, isn't it?
And the psychological games they play, text win by writing win, that's like the expectation for a win.
Yeah.
I've got win, so I'm going to win, and it's such a clever game. It's such a clever game they play, and the book is there to break that open so people can see that it is a game. Some of my early reviews on it were sort of the stuff in there I didn't even realize was gambling. I've been gambling, I didn't even realize.
And that was from adults that were reading it. That's amazing. That is a great book you've written. And as you say as well, getting them to reflect, you know, maybe in the home, they've seen a parent on the phone playing bingo every day or whatever, you know, it's just raising awareness. So well done to you. Like, you also have written a book that's talking about things we often don't talk about in society. So gets a thumbs up from me.
Well, on the likes of TikTok, you mentioned gambling on TikTok and they give you a shadow ban. That's how hard they kicking back against it. But it's everywhere, isn't it? It's everywhere. What I did with my children, in a closed environment, we sort of did roulette. So I talk about casinos and the likes, and I've got a casino set up, and we'll play a casino set up for a set period of time with a set period of counters, and then after half an hour or a designated time, we'll then stop and we'll say, well, who's winning, who's losing, where's the money gone, and then the house wins every time rule.
That's a good lesson to learn.
So by playing that with the children, they're sort of young teenagers. We're at this point when we're playing the games. After a while, like the one would be like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do it. Where the other one was like, yeah, I'll have a little go. And children are different. They deal with things differently, don't they? Like some will want to have a play with it. But I mean, the book is talking to the people that will want to go and do it. So then it's giving them the rules that they give themselves. So if they do want to place a bet, they know what the rules are. They know it's a game that they're not likely to win. And if it's part of a fun, controlled activity, and they know where the levels are, then if you can cope with that emotionally, then that is not 100% a bad thing. But as I've put in the book, the moment you're placing a bet with the need for a win, then you've lost.
It changes. That boundary becomes blurred, doesn't it? I think you're right. Anything with safe boundaries, and that's what we need to do with children, is raise awareness. So good luck with that book. That's what we need to do, is not be afraid to have these conversations with children and young people, because they're smarter than we think. You know, just if we don't talk about gambling, if we don't talk about death, it's not going to make it not happen. So it's about talking about it in age appropriate way, isn't it?
Again in the book we mention Pinocchio and the jackass moments. And it's providing that opportunity to learn and understand what the process is. And you're playing somebody else's game. You're not playing a game. You're playing somebody else's game. And found to win, yes please. And the amount of money they're making on that is ridiculous. And I'll put some examples in there, and I'll put some examples in about the rules of probability, and in each circumstance, people are convinced if they've sort of lost 5 times, then it must be their chance to win on the 6th.
Wow.
When you talk about the probability is not changed. It's still an unlikely event.
It sounds excellent.
So that's good. We have run over my normal time, but this has been...
it's gone so quickly. Thank you for making space for today's episode. Good.
So I'll put in the links for Dr. Poppy on Twitter, and links for her book will be in the description. And once we go offline, we'll have a little chat about your illustrator, because I'm looking for illustration for Catch a Leaf, so we'll talk about that.
Definitely. But well done on all your great books. Keep doing your great work, and thanks for having me on the show.
And if you're brave, read Time to Click.
Yes, I'm treating myself.
Right then, thanks everybody for
Simon.
watching. Thanks, Dr. Poppy, for coming on. It's been a great show. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thanks so much. Bye.